We trust the lamb, not the donkey or the elephant.
This new movement that's developing, because I seem to see a pattern, which is at some point in a lot of the lives of the individuals who are part of this movement, they were deeply influenced by the new atheist movement in one way or another. And perhaps it was Dawkins or Hitchens or whoever, but they convinced many people in this movement that, yeah, there is no God, that's not intellectually viable. And yet they watched what's happened in the aftermath of jettisoning the Christian story from the West, and they've said, wow, the results of that are not inconsequential. It's not good for society. And in fact, the very things that I want to value and I want to hold dearly are deeply rooted in the Christian narrative. And so I can't throw it away. I can't toss it to the side. And so now we're coming to a weird place of saying I'm an atheist or I'm an agnostic. And yet I have a deep respect for Christianity because it's created the structures in which I live and that I think make the world a better place to live in general. Is that a good summary of a lot of people that are
I
part
think
of this movement?
that's where people find themselves. And I guess, to put it very succinctly, a lot of people asking, can you continue to have the fruits without the roots? So as we cut off, as it were, the Christian tradition increasingly in Western countries, will it continue to produce the fruits that we've all enjoyed from that Christian tradition up till now in terms of human rights, democracy, and so on, and frankly, just a kind of a willingness to see the humanity in other people. I mean, obviously, I'm not pretending that Christendom has a spotless record in any sense. It's a very mixed bag in terms of the way the Christian story has been applied in different situations and over history, obviously, but having said all that, it has essentially given people a kind of a story of what life is, that they were made for a purpose, that each person is made in God's image and therefore has intrinsic value, worth, and dignity, and that has informed, and that God cared enough for his creation to come in person to die for it, a sacrificial death, and has imbued in us this sense that we are to go on bringing the good news of transformation and a new kingdom to the rest of the world. That, if you like, has been the driving ethic in one way or another of Western civilization. Again, very poorly executed at times, but it's kind of it, and so much of that idea, even though people don't recognize it today, still informs just the idea of something like progress, moral progress. That we are progressing towards some better view. Even the phrase woke, as it's used as a pejorative phrase these days, but where did it come from? It came from the idea that people are waking up to the reality of systemic injustice or whatever it might be, that they are becoming enlightened. These are all deeply Christian ideas when you actually dig back to them. They say there's an ultimate good, an ultimate standard, and we have to be woken up, reborn in a sense, to perceive it and to work towards it. It's just in modern culture, we now kind of talk the talk, but we no longer have the moorings that went with that of the biblical foundation. And so I think what you increasingly see is a kind of a religious outworking of that, where people have to get it right, or they are cast asunder. They become the heretics, the new heretics of these quasi-religious movements, because it's no longer moored to the idea of our intrinsic worth and dignity being grounded outside ourselves, and the idea of grace and forgiveness and everything else that comes with the Christian story. So I think it's just a fascinating kind of moment, where we're asking, well, we're still being informed by fundamentally Christian ideas, but do we have the foundations you need for that transformative reality to happen in the world, in the absence of God, in the absence of Jesus Christ as the kind of the driving force behind that? Can we do it in our own power? And I think increasingly people are finding when they try to do it in their own power, they just end up in massive Twitter spats, basically. And it looks very messy and ugly. So that's kind of my big picture overview, I'd say, of how it's working out at the moment.
I want to come back around to this idea of how those who are maybe fully embracing critical theory are are on the one hand in their practice, their discourse, very religious. They might not think about themselves that way, which does seem to be part of the reason why these new atheists are targeting it, is they see the same religiosity pattern taking place there. But on the other hand, like you said, how they've left behind, because they've jettisoned Christianity, they've left behind some key components like forgiveness and grace and mercy that help to temper the justice of what the Bible says. But before we go there, I just want to stay on Douglas Murray, Tom Holland, Jordan Peterson, this whole movement for one more second, because one of the questions I always find myself asking as I listen to them on your show and in other places, I've read all of their books. I mean, Tom Holland, fantastic historian. I've read every book he's put out. He's just amazing. The question I always want to ask is, but why not? I mean, is Christianity just a useful lie? Is it just a useful narrative that's produced some interesting things? So it's just maybe some sort of evolutionary thing that happened for the benefit of the species. I mean, what's the obstacle of going all the way and saying, gosh, if it does produce so much good, so much beauty, so much, again, not exclusively, like you said, there's lots of dark things in the Christian past. Why not come to see it as it must be the truth?
Yeah. And that's it. Again, I feel like you must have read my book or something, Patrick, because you're bringing out issues that I kind of, do write about and deal with in the book. But yeah, there's a kind of way in which, particularly the Jordan Petersons and so on, the psychologists who are involved in this, it looks like sometimes they're framing it as Christianity is wonderful. Look at everything it's given to us. It's a really useful fiction. Basically, it's basically so helpful, but we're not saying it's true. Obviously, we're just saying it's really useful. And whenever I've, on the one occasion I did get to ask Jordan Peterson, in person, well, do you actually believe in God? He gave one of those classic Jordan Peterson answers, of, well, it depends what you mean by God. and there's a sense in which I think there is a kind of sense in which many people are drawn towards the way in which Christianity makes sense of us as human beings, but they can't quite reconcile themselves to the metaphysical reality of that means believing there really is more than matter and physical stuff, that there is an ultimate purpose, an ultimate mind behind the universe, an ultimate kind of directionality to it all, and as frankly a guy called Jesus who lived, died, and rose again. For a lot of people, that is the stumbling block. They like the concepts that we've been gifted. Human rights, wonderful. Scientific revolution arguably was a very Christian-led thing, wonderful. So many aspects of our culture, art, welfare, education that are clearly, were Christian. It was the Christian revolution that drove them. And yet, you're right. A lot of people just find, but I can't get. Does that mean that Jesus really was the Son of God and rose from the dead? And of course, in that sense, you can't make. I don't think you can make the case that just because of all the wonderful things Christianity may have gifted us, that therefore it's true. It could all of that could still be wonderful, and it could still be a religious fiction, a kind of useful invention of some kind. For me, I, as a Christian, would say, I want to take the totality of everything out there and just weigh it all up. And when I do look at the extraordinary way in which Christianity has impacted the world, you've got to ask what was at the center of that drove people to completely reimagine the way we should treat slaves and women and children. What was at the center of that sort of made people completely turn the values of the culture they were living in on its head? And for me, that does mean that there must be some kind of event at the center of all this that makes sense of this. These radical shifts don't happen, just because of purely kind of cultural, socio-evolutionary reasons, in my opinion. And for me, the great thing about Christianity is it is a historical religion. It is birthed in a set of events in the first century that were written down not long after the time, and which were testified to by an awful lot of people at the time. And to me, it's there are plenty of stories. I tell some of them in this book of people who have been convinced by the intellectual historical case for Christianity, as well as the extraordinary social, difference it's made in the world. And I find a lot of these people kind of teetering on the edge of that. I don't think I'm telling tales out of school to say that Tom Holland on some days finds that he just would be happy to call himself a Christian. And on other days, he kind of thinks, maybe not. I don't know. He's kind of, the way he puts it is, one way or another, you've got to believe in a miracle. Okay. He says, or the way he says, if you're a humanist, if you're someone who believes in human rights and that sort of thing, there is no scientific explanation for that. There's no, purely rational explanation for this idea of treating people as, with intrinsic value, equality, dignity, and everything else. He says that you're basically investing. You're basically, that's a theological view that you believe if you believe that. And he said, so if you're going to believe that, why not believe that Jesus rose from the dead? It's like, and for Tom Holland, he would say he just finds the story totally captivating. He just finds he'd rather believe that story than the kind of the materialist story of reality. And so I think to some extent, for some people, it's about letting themselves go, kind of letting that kind of skeptical want to pull everything apart part of their brain go and let the imaginative side of their brain, where what if this really was true? What if we're living in a world that is truly magical, in which there is a God who came, died, rose again, and everything changed because of that? I think, I feel like we're on the edge of people getting so tired of the materialist narrative and the fact that it hasn't delivered any answers, that you might just get people suddenly thinking, you know what, in for a penny, in for a pound, maybe I can try this out and see if it seems to hold my weight. And I do see, grown thinking individuals who have crossed that line as adults and have found actually this does seem to make sense of life. And I wonder whether we might see more of those as we go on.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me. The idea of Christianity being a useful fiction, to me, feels a little bit like saying, well, if you understand how a refrigerator works, there's Radeon, there's all these different components that creates all the cooling that keeps your drinks and everything else cool inside of it. Well, all that scientific language that I might have used to describe it, it's all fake, it's all made up, but it works. So, it would be irrational for me to say, well, if it works, that actually might suggest that the science behind it is describing something true. And that's the implausibility bit for me, which I think you just highlighted. But the other half I love that you just said is you have to believe in a miracle either way. I mean, it's a miracle that the world turned upside down, that human rights became a thing. I mean, it makes, and that's why Tom Holland is so great, because he was a historian of the Persian Empire and the Greek period with Alexander and the Roman period. So he understands the cultural milieu in which Christianity was birthed. And so he understands this was entirely contrary to how everyone thought. And so it's a miracle that everything changed. You have to believe in a miracle. It's either he rose from the dead or this weird thing happened that we can't explain.
And I think what's so helpful in a way, because Tom Holland knows that the pagan world so well, and he knows how unusual our moment in history is. And the problem is, anyone living in the West at this moment in history kind of just assumes, well, everyone's, it's just normal to believe in human rights, right? It's just normal to treat people equally. It's normal to to want education and for people to act with compassion and for people, for charity to exist. And all you have to do is go back in history and say, well, no, it was not normal. People used to leave newborn babies out. Exposure was a common practice in the Greco-Roman world, where, if you had a child that you did not want, because they were female, maybe because they were born with a deformity, you just left them that was just normal practice. You left them to the wild animals. And today we think, my goodness, barbaric. How could they possibly? The only reason we've changed our mind on that is because of Christianity. And so for me, it's sometimes you have to step this, because we're so used to living in a completely Christianized West. We don't realize just how unusual, how completely contingent these beliefs we have are. And as you say, Tom Holland does an amazing job of showing that, and making you realize, something happened, and maybe what those first followers claimed happened is actually what happened. Yeah.
Well, and again, this is where I think the new atheism thing really runs aground, which is, if you just use your observation skills, the basic skills that, science is rooted in, looking at things, when you look at the world, the idea of human equality is simply not obvious. I mean, that's just why highly rational thinkers like Aristotle and Plato, they looked at the world and they said, hey, look, some people are born tall, some people are born short. Some people are born men, some people are born women. Some people are born with innate intellectual capacities, others are born without those innate intellectual capacities. Some people are born with leadership qualities, others aren't. And because they saw these differences, they said, well, then it's clear that there's a hierarchy of humanity. You want to have the best leader, the strongest man, the most intellectual person on the top, because he's the best sort of human. And all you have to do is look and see that that's the case. And again, so this is why, again, I think atheism runs aground at the end of the day, is it's not obvious. There's nothing obvious about saying that we are all equal in God's eyes. And so, again, that's why I love Tom Holland, Douglas Murray, all these guys, because I think they're highlighting, especially Tom Holland, some of these dimensions for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I was just looking up on my phone. I was trying to find a quick quote, because it's not just, in a sense, the ancients who recognized that, of course, people are born different. There's no reason to believe that we're all equal and we should all be treated with equal compassion and dignity and everything else. Even modern thinkers, the ones who kind of, I think, actually grasp the nettle here, are also recognizing that human rights, you're not going to get to human rights through just science or anything like that. I mean, Yuval Noah Harari is, an interesting secular thinker, and, published books like Sapiens and Homo Deus. But there's a passage, I failed to find it actually, but so I'm going to try and sort of regurgitate it from memory, but where he just very clearly states, look, let's not pretend that our belief in human rights is anything but a Christian invention. That's what it is. You are not going to find human rights by, sequencing the DNA of humans. You're not going to find it in a kind of scientific explanation. It's, when the framers of the US, Constitution and so on, and Declaration talked about the inherent equality of all men, it was because they were saying it from a clearly Christian framework. So I like it when even thinkers like Yuval Noah Harari, who is no friend of Christianity, he is very much a committed atheist and very critical in many ways of various aspects of organized religion. But he's willing to say, look, let's not kid ourselves that human rights exists outside of this religious fiction. And so I just think it's fascinating when you do get that honesty, both from people who are sympathetic to Christianity, like Tom Holland, and people who are actually not sympathetic to Christianity, but still recognize that you can't make this idea that human rights sort of emerged out of a vacuum,
Yeah, I think I might have found the quote, because while you were sharing, I was like, I think I know where this is. And there's one line in it, and this may or may not have been what you're referring to, that I think highlights it. He says, human rights are just a story we've invented. They're not an objective reality. They're not a biological fact about Homo sapiens. Take a human being, cut him open, look inside. You will find the heart, the kidneys, neurons, hormones, DNA, but you won't find any human rights. The only place you'll find rights is in the stories that we have invented and spread over the last few centuries. And he goes on to say Christianity is the main one of those stories. And so, I think this is such a fascinating shift that we've seen.
I'm Patrick. Thanks for watching this video. If you're passionate about ending tribalism in the church and giving Jesus your allegiance, you're not alone. We have a podcast and a book. They're both called Truth Over Tribe. You can download the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can buy the book on Amazon. I hope you'll check them out.